Blues fans, we've made it. The final round and the final analysis. On Thursday night, there were player milestones and a few more players fighting for another contract, therefore their career. Now, I know Carlton were basically playing a glorified VFL side. The skills were hot garbage at times and it was a dead rubber, a low pressure contest. I mean, look at this. But this stood as the last chance for some to show their worth if they haven't already, elevating the stakes, and if you can't produce in light of that, well, you probably don't deserve a contract next year. I think this is an interesting discussion too that comes within that. Take a listen to this quote by Michael Voss.
If there's one positive we've got out the back half of this year is that we've started to see some of those players and their identity or what they'll probably ultimately be like as footballers. It's not at the consistent level that you would like it as yet. You appreciate that they're going to be errors. So when you look at games, you have to dissect it in a couple of ways. It's sort of like, how do we execute? Where were the breakdowns? What were the older players involved in that versus the younger players? To ensure that you're actually looking at the game the right way.
Well, let's take a look at this game film the right way, a balanced way, given the circumstances. From the players vying for a 2026 list spot, what's been done right? As Voss was alluding to, what sort of identity are they forging as players? What errors are they making? For the final time this season, let's break it down. So, with Koning basically highlighting the writing on the wall, these were the 5 out-of-contract Blues that took to the field in round 24. Funnily enough, my video slate in the last month involve most of these guys. So if you want a detailed view and you've missed these videos, those videos will be linked in the description. What I'm looking for in a low-pressure game like this, not necessarily the quantity of possessions, but the quality of possessions. How do you travel in contest situations? How do you decision make? What's your demeanor? Your work rate when you don't have the ball? Let's assess each player here. Nick Haynes, well, I think Vossi values the leadership and the valuable attributes he's shown over 2025, which showed again in a modest 3-quarter performance on the wing, which is a role I unpacked in a previous video weeks ago. There were some strong moments where I felt like he read the ball well in the air, and he hindered Essendon's ability to really advance the ball forward, rarely letting up. Pretty sure there's a 1-year deal being offered at this stage, so it will barely be a surprise if he returns in 2026. As is the same for Jesse Motlop, who unbelievably had never had a 20 disposal game in his 63-game career until this match. Motlop was one of those who rolled through the middle periodically, where he had 11 centre bounce attendances and impacted. He had a couple centre clearances as Carlton dominated that area, of course, one of those resulting in a goal. He had the 6 score involvements too, but 18 of his 22 possessions were uncontested, indicating the state of the game. However, unbelievably, Mott's had never had as many handballs in a game either in his career. And when I look at his performance, this was the best part of his game as he got involved in defensive midfield and gave relief to his teammates. This is also where Carlton looked their strongest. But the question mark, which transcends into next year for him, as this year has shown, is how does he cope when the stakes rise? How does that manipulate his decision-making, his disposal? And despite the lack of pressure on the night, this did show. Let's observe this example where Motlop is in the forward line. Carlton will need pace on the ball next year and good field kicking as well. As Jacob Wiedering intercepts, Motlop works his backside off to create an outlet, which I can commend. Flynn Young as a high half forward to commence will overlap and burn a 37-year-old Goldstein. Carlton have the representation up the ground, so this play needs to be pretty quick in order to be effective. So why Motlop on his right side with all that space to kick to advantage doesn't execute that kick? There's simply no answer. He took too long, allowing this man to roll up, and then he becomes a casualty with the man rolling past, eliminating him. Here's one more example. Billy Wilson breaks clear from the pack, and that leaves Essendon exposed at the front of the contest. Motlop underhits a less pressured kick, keeps working to his credit when Essendon fail to kill the passage of play. However, the minute a defender rolls up, the decision making goes out the window. He's gone for a 45-metre snap over a bit of composure, maybe a little sidestep where he can use that pace a little bit more so. Or Akers, who's making an inverted run, could be an option to help find Williams. Mott's may get an extension, but if he wants to elevate his game and equally Carlton's, because their defensive half scoring game was inferior to Essendon's for 3 quarters, this needs to improve. Now, how about the curious case of Will White? This guy had a measly 4 disposals, 0 tackles, and unfortunately, I don't like his future chances. Given this game aside, he's been out of favour after the bye. I think the position he played was quite tough, tucked away in the forward line for basically the game's entirety, and he was definitely a candidate to get involved at stages which didn't ultimately eventuate. I don't necessarily think the setup helps sometimes. We know Carlton Smalls sort of line the half-forward line and are a little bit closer to the centre bounce stoppage. They'll more likely than not be the first ones in, while Essendon will be the first ones back, provided their direct man is away from the ball. Very clear, Carlton are aiming to get it deep, and can do so given they've got the men open at the front of the stoppage to carry it inside 50. White's here, his direct man here. It's good anticipation by the defender, especially when you know there won't be a switching of angles, and as a forward, you can't stop that. You can't hinder your defender in any way, given the starting position. If I was to judge his effort, I think I'd have to give him an A++, which generally goes for every game. There were a few occasions where he had a direct bearing on Essendon's downfall in moments which won't show up on a stat sheet. But equally, I think there were some moments which flag White as a bit of a vulnerability, mainly in contests. If you're going to play zone off of a kick-in, the expectation is you have authority over the ground you command. On this kick-in, White is positioned to spoil coming from over the top. Haynes can cover the longer, wider option, and Cripps can cover the space in front. The kick has been overcooked, so it's basically worked into your lap, and White just spills the grab, creating a 2-on-1 with White at ground level, and this unlocks the open man over the top. With Shield moving forward, it opens up the space behind, provided Essendon follow up and beat their men to the spot, which they do. We witness some razzle-dazzle after Essendon get it in their forward 50, though Snicko denies Essendon from being rewarded. And there's little concentration lapses, such as here, where that man Pryor, pun intended, presses up the ground on an Essendon counter. It collapses into a contest game, and while White may think Carlton will win it, he just dips from the contest and leaves his man alone. The very man that gets used for relief and as a distraction, as Essendon work it to the back of contest with those loose men, and they are able to hold their position. Ultimately, Carlton can't employ players simply to work hard. If you're going to be involved sparingly, you need to hold a large impact. And I think for the outcomes White's mistakes resulted in, it definitely doesn't help his case. However, Frankie Evans, what can't this guy do? Highest ranking player on the ground aside, again, he led pressure acts and he led score involvements. That signals a player who's opportunistic, he works hard, and he makes the right decisions. Shown in a dynamic third quarter and really for the last month, where he's played some quality footy. That makes for a seemingly easy decision when it comes to whether or not you extend him over some uncontracted Smalls. At least in my book, that is. This is something so subtle, yet so clever. After Carlton win the clearance, Carlton have an advantage in who will get to the contest first. Evans pushes his man under the ball and bounces off. So now he's well stationed and separated from his opponent. So he'll be there for the rove. And it initially looks like he's going to opt for Akers, but you'll see him change his mind and give it to the man in front, Corey Durden. If Evans executes this handball, you run a few risks. Akers gets caught, Akers miskicks or lacks the punch to get a deep entry, or even the handball gets intercepted to take things back a step. You've allowed Moya to become an option top of the square. Over here, The smalls can push deeper to crumb in that space. The fullback now needs to work back to block the airspace, and as the Bombers account for their men, Walsh can lead into the gap formed. Walsh can get it nice and deep, to the advantage of the leaper in behind. And not only that, but that situation seals a free kick, top of the square, all because of Frankie's decision right at the start. And last but not least, Flynn Young. The stats indicate a solid game. Most inside 50s of anyone on the ground, took a bunch of marks, kicked a couple of goals. But this could have come because it was pretty bruise-free footy. He did well identifying and utilising the space permitted. But this makes the list decision surrounding him quite tough when you base it off a game like this. Flynn is a bit of an improv artist. In previous weeks, you'll see him produce a tap or two, which benefits the team. Here's one example of that this week. I think that IQ on the fly definitely goes far when the pressure arises, and I think there were times he demonstrated that effectiveness. He did provide a mixed bag concerning his delivery inside forward 50. I've noticed Carlton haven't necessarily had a left footer on the wing for a bit of time now, so having a Matt Carroll and then a Flynn Young along that side at half forward, or with the flexibility to be placed on the wing, that's a decent asset to have on your list. He can wheel and go or swing it across the body, and he generally doesn't flight the ball. It's a little bit lower in the air, so that brings something different for sure. But there's definitely elements of his game which would indicate he's still got a lot of work to do, whether that be concerning composure or polish or execution that a more seasoned footballer at the level would possess. So while the stat line looks pleasant, I don't look at a game like this and say Flynn Young warrants a place on our list in 2026. He could be a good depth option. I like him for being a left-sided player, and he's got some creativity about him, a profile of player Carlton wouldn't mind having. Carlton also selected him mid-year, so maybe they'd want to prolong his stay and see that development take hold. If I had to be a gambler though, I'm not sure he's done enough, with some unforgiving list decisions lying ahead this offseason. Let me know who you think will survive the culling out of these 5 and provide your reasoning. With that said, that's me done for 2025. I want to thank you all for your support over the course of the 2025 AFL season. Your comments, the likes you've dropped, the subscriptions. It's been a pleasure bringing you the analysis videos each round. Enjoy the off season, and for the last time in 2025, stay safe and bye for now.